Hello and welcome to Backbending Week Level 2. We are going to have an emphasis on opening the psoas muscle today. This is the deepest muscle in the human body, and it is what connects our torso to our legs. And for most of us, it's very tight and contracted and can kind of negatively affect a lot of the systems in our body. And it can negatively affect or positively affect our back bends. So if we lengthen the psoas, we can have a deeper experience in our back bends. So we're going to start, just as we always do, taking a moment to center ourselves and prepare for the practice today. We're just taking a comfortable seated position. Maybe that's Virasana, Vajrasana, sitting on the heels, or cross-legged Sukhasana. And just taking a moment to settle in, closing the eyes, finding a little more fine-tuned adjustments with the alignment, coming into the witness state that our yoga really invites us into most of our time in our days awake. We are kind of orchestrating everything and directing. So taking this opportunity to just kind of drop into become more of a witness, accepting whatever shows up, whatever turns up, with an evenness of response, equanimity. We talk about in yoga quite a bit. Maybe joining your hands in front of your heart and welcoming an intention for this practice, or maybe for your day or your future, or maybe for another person, another sentient being, group of people, perhaps, whatever it is. It can help to bring a little bit of context into your practice. And as you feel ready, bowing toward your own heart, lifting your head, letting your eyes gently come open, and welcome. All right, so before we kind of get into it, we're going to come onto our backs and just kind of locate the psoas. So feel free to just recline in Supta Tadasana. So Supta is reclining, Tadasana is mountain pose. Spacing your feet hip distance and just activating your legs as if you were standing in this mountain pose. And you can place your fingertips over your hip points, just kind of right on top there. And you're just going to take turns lifting and lowering your legs from side to side. And you're going to kind of bring some awareness into the space between your fingertips, which is your transverse abdominals. And if we can kind of recruit these muscles here, we're going to learn a really important action to save the psoas from always contracting and being the one to kind of help lift the leg. So you're going to, just as you touch the hip points, think about your narrowing the passageway between the hip points using the muscles of the transverse abdominals. You shouldn't be feeling a lot underneath your fingertips. You're just kind of bringing attention to the space between. And one thing you can notice as you raise the leg is don't try to lift the hip point. So try to keep your hips really level as you lift and lower the legs. Okay, and next time your heel comes down, just flop the feet out, rest your hands. Take a few breaths. So we're going to take our hand, either hand, dominant is fine or not dominant, whatever you prefer. And you're going to locate the hip point either side, and you're going to locate the navel. And if you kind of run your hand to the center point between the navel and whatever hip point you're touching, you're going to have good kind of contact with part of the psoas muscle. And you can kind of dig your fingers in there because it is the deepest muscle. So it's not going to be the surface, which is more the abdominals. You're going to dig your hands in there and just kind of see if you can locate kind of it's a very kind of stringy, for a lot of us, it's very kind of hard or tough. And you might also feel a lot of sensation. That's probably indicating that you found it. So I want you to go ahead and, without awareness between the hip points, now that you found it, just raise your leg and lower it. And hopefully, I'm hoping that you felt that muscle underneath your fingertips kind of jump and contract and harden. So that's what we usually do when we're not as aware. So now I'm going to have you come back to, you're going to keep touching your psoas, but try to recruit those muscles between the hip points like you did earlier. And with that awareness, now lift your leg and see if you can keep that psoas quiet. Okay, lower. And now you can bring your hand to the other side just so you're feeling both, because the psoas runs on both sides of the body. So find that same point on the opposite side, lift that leg, and just as you recruit those lower abdominals, transverse abdominals, your duty, your job is to kind of keep the psoas quiet, okay? So just do it a few times on each side so that you feel you kind of have a sense of what it takes to support your psoas muscle. And then when you kind of get the idea, you can just lower your heel. You can keep your hands where they are because I want you to do something else in a moment, but let your legs relax. And now go ahead and just bring your feet back into kind of Tadasana action, toes above heels, legs pressing down. And I want you to see if you can just kind of palpate or slowly massage the muscle with both hands at the same time. And just notice what you feel. So for me, it's pretty intense. It's almost in the pain level. I've always kind of known that I've had a lot of tension here. But, you know, oftentimes forgetting because we get used to our tension. So I think it's a really good practice to work on psoas, and I'm hoping to actually do more of it, not just this 1 week, but just kind of, I'm learning too. So I want to learn more about the psoas because I'm intrigued. And when I'm intrigued, I like to kind of dig in deeper and learn more. Okay, so we're going to kind of leave it at that we've found the psoas. It starts up in the thoracic, I want you to know that, and it finishes in the lesser trochanters, which you can think about as your inner thighs or kind of the inside point of the outer hips. So that's where the muscles begin and end, and they're really deep inside the body. So from there, we're going to find our way to our sides, and we're going to come into Pariyantasana. So this is one of our deeper back bends, and it comes from hero pose. You'll set up as if you're going into hero pose, and you're going to create a little block setup behind you as well. We want to have one block supporting right behind the breastbone, so across the shoulder blade region, one block for the head. I always use a block for my hero pose, so if you need support for your sitting bones, make sure you're taking that. We don't want to have dangling sitting bones. And just take a few moments in the upright Pariyankasana seated position, making those adjustments, kneecaps looking forward, rotating the flesh of the calf muscles out. If you need to, rotating the underside of the thighs in. If you need to, what you're looking for is kneecaps, all four corners looking forward, toes pointing straight back, your heels right outside your hips, sitting bones touching down. Those are the basics of the alignment, as we should know by now. So you're going to kind of help yourself back. I have my blocks running horizontally, so they're going to kind of cover more of the expanse of the back body. Expanse is our word for horizontal space in yoga, and extension is our word for vertical. So as you come back, you might be able to see I'm using my thumbs, I'm wiggling the block with them, so that I'm helping place the block right where I want it to be, kind of behind the breastbone, because we're really trying to support the chest staying lifted. You might see that my knees have come up. You're going to attempt to keep your knees grounded. And if you find you're not ready for Pariyankasana yet, just be on the hands, and you're going to start to, come down. Eventually you will. And you can see right here that I'm kind of concave. So that's another piece of the work we're going to do today, is really getting this more open in the hip flexor region. And then lastly, your head will come down. If you have any pain, you're going to come into either modified pose or support yourself. You might want to put a blanket running behind the knees all the way to your heels. That can be a really nice way to support yourself here. You might also need to support underneath your shins, as I oftentimes do. And you can always raise the height of the sitting bones as well. You can put bolster or something more significant if you need to kind of fill in that gap between your butt and your feet. So starting with the hands low, you're doing your best to extend the knees forward and down, even though they want to go in the opposite direction, up and back. So forward and down. You're rooting out the outer shins to keep your alignment correct, because we know our knees like to rotate in. You're taking the tailbone up into the body to elongate the lumbar spine. And then eventually you're going to raise your arms and extend them overhead. But reminding your shoulders, they're moving into the torso. They're not to follow the fingertips, which is very tempting. Shoulders get confused because they're between the hips and the fingertips, and they want to go flying up with those fingertips. But keep them part of your grounded body. And once you're here, if you find yourself with hands touching floor, you have nowhere to go. So you always want to have room to grow in yoga. So if you're here touching the floor, grab your elbows so that you can continue to extend and lengthen. We'll stay about 8 more breaths. Beautiful lengthening opportunity for the psoas. Try engaging those transverse abdominal muscles between your hip points so that your psoas isn't kind of stuck in a frozen or contracted position. And if you are crossing your arms, re-extend the arms, and we're all going to bring our hands to our feet and pressing down, lifting yourself up with your chest leading you. Come up and just take a moment pausing in Virasana. And then you're going to remove your setup. You can put the blocks out of the way. And find your way into Adho Mukha Svanasana, downward facing dog. Keeping knees bent, heels lifted, and just taking a moment to bring your chest toward your thighs, to bring your thighs front to back. And then start to lower the heels, keeping the hips as far back as you've brought them. Widening open the backs of your knees. On an in-breath, raise your right leg straight up as high as it goes without rotating your pelvis. We're going to tap into right psoas here. You're going to bend at your peak level. You're going to bend right knee, 90 degrees, and rotate, peeking under right arm, keeping weight even across the hands, and feeling, sensing, seeing in your mind's eye the right psoas. From your thoracic spine, the 12th rib, all the way down the inner thigh, yawning open. Go ahead and rotate back, extend your leg. On an in-breath, raising the left leg, bending the knee, and then gently turning and looking under the left arm. And you might experience that you have different tension patterns in the sides. So just being where you are, as always, nothing new. Couple more breaths here. Maybe using the weight of that left leg toward the right side of the mat to help you elongate left psoas. Beautiful. Returning to hips pointing towards your wrists. Extend your leg, lower your leg. Place your knees and sit back and take a few moments in child's pose. Keep your arms forward. crawling the fingers forward as you pull the sitting bones back toward the heels, creating dynamic action in your child's pose. Finding the very tip of the tailbone and pointing it toward the floor. Rolling your inner wrist down as you raise the inner upper arms up. And inviting the sacrum to move away from the skull. On your in-breath, find your way to hands and knees table. We're going to raise the left knee, just because my left knee is facing you. We'll start with that. On an exhale, hug the left knee to the forehead. On the inhale, it's a donkey kick. So you're going to keep the leg bent. Bring your heel toward the back of your head. Exhale, knee towards forehead. Inhale, heel toward the back of the head, looking forward. Couple more times here. Last one. You're going to stay in this back bend, in this donkey kick. I'm going to have you see if you can reach back with left hand, find the top of the foot, kick back into your hand, and see about rotating open here. Okay, so it's a little bit of a balancing maneuver, but use the pressure of your foot into your hand. That will give you a lot of support. And meanwhile, think about left psoas, elongating. Make sure you're gently narrowing the passageway between your hip points, using the contraction of the stomach muscles across the hip points, the lower abdominals. Nice. Now see if you can move into balancing half moon kneeling version. So you're stacking the arm, extending the leg. Good. Nice work. Placing the hand, placing the knee, setting up for table pose. We're going to do it to the other side. So as you're ready, you're going to lift right knee. Exhale, hug the knee to the forehead. Inhale, donkey kick. So keep the knee kind of locked in a 90 degree. Exhale. Inhale. Couple more. Exhale. Inhale. Once more. Inhale, hold it there once you're in that donkey kick. You're going to slowly maneuver your weight. So you can reach back with the right hand, grabbing the top of the foot, kicking back. So you're opening that front thigh. You're coming into a back bend here. You're spreading the chest. Really pressurize the foot into your hand to give you more support. Breathing well. Good. Thinking about right psoas muscle elongating. Use the stomach muscles between the hip points to support the psoas. Give your psoas a break. Psoas will do everything all the time if you let it. Go ahead and find that kneeling version of Arda Chandrasana. Good. And see if you can make your way back to table. And we're going to set up for frog pose. So frog pose, we're going to start to address the kind of the attachment point of the lesser trochanter, where the psoas muscle attaches our torso to our legs. Pretty cool. And we're going to reduce the traction of the mat by spreading a blanket out, because we don't want it to be sticky. We want our knees to separate as they're able to. So you can come onto your forearms. Your knees are going to stay in line with your hips, although they're going to be wider than your hips. So this is not child's pose where you're sitting back here. You're going to keep your knees right above your hips. You're going to be stepping the knees out wide and coming down that way. So once you get the knees to your kind of first starting position nice and wide, you want to make sure they're not behind your hips or in front of your hips. That being said, if this is excruciating, bring your hips in front of your knees. You can pull your weight forward. Also, if you need more, start to back it up. Move your hips behind your knees. So you have to kind of Goldilocks it, but roughly stating, we're going to kind of put the hips in line with the knees on the same plane as the knees. Okay, so your forearms are there to give you support and control. So pressurize the forearms into the ground. And if you need to back out, if you need to, I shouldn't say back out because it's the wrong direction. If you need less, shift forward. If you need more, you can back up, okay? So to kind of Goldilocks in there, we're gonna move this pose with the breath. Before we go on, make sure your ankles are 90 degrees, your knees are 90 degrees, your hips are 90 degrees roughly. You're resting on the insteps of your feet. And again, my feet are not together like I'm in child's pose. They're in line with my knees. So ankles in line with my knees. So inhale, pull forward. And exhale, sit back. And we're going to do this about 8 breaths until we kind of find our sweet spot. And then we're going to land there. So while we're doing this, just a little more about psoas. The muscles of the psoas are interlaced with the muscles of the diaphragm. So our breath affects our psoas, and our psoas also affects our breathing. So we can really start to unlock our breath. If our breath is kind of shallow or trapped or stuck or anxious, we can start to unlock our breath if we tap into psoas and start to lengthen psoas and release tension from the psoas. Okay, let's do 3 more. Inhale, exhale back. And then the next time you exhale and sit back, just kind of land in whatever position you're going to be in. If you have an easy way to get your forehead down, you know that's going to help you settle. You could use your own hands or fists. You could put a prop in front of you and just rest the forehead that way. And then, of course, you're going to feel that your back is kind of sagging, your belly is kind of collapsing. So just give yourself a little bit of a scoop up of the rib cage, the stomach, toward the back body, just so you kind of equalize that. You're not exploiting it or falling into the front body. Okay, making any adjustments you need. Be here another minute. Half a minute left. Can be quite intense for some of us, this pose. Make sure your breath is nice and deep. Okay, to come out of it, bring your weight forward enough that you can pull the knees not as narrow as the hips, but just a little bit wider than your hips. Bring your feet together and then sit back. You're in child's pose. Just take a few breaths with your forehead down. Good. And now start to come up. And the blanket that's over your mat, you can remove. We'll put our 2 blocks at the top of the mat. And you can just set them down low. You don't need them high. And you're going to step your right foot forward and your left knee is going to kneel. We're going to come into twisted lizard, which is a really nice one for elongating the psoas. So you're going to begin with your left hand down on your block. Your right toes are turned out 45 degrees. You're going to roll out to your outer right foot with your right hand just pressing there and turning your chest to the right. See if you can start to kind of soften or relax into the left hip flexor space. And then you're going to take your right hand to the back of the head, lift the elbow tip up and back. And you should get a nice invitation to left psoas to elongate. So it's important that we're not sitting down on that left shoulder. Bring enough pressure into your hand that you're able to keep your ear and shoulder really nice and far apart. You're not collapsing onto the shoulder. And really extend up and back through the elbow tip. Good, now start to kind of unwind out of that lizard pose, and you'll come into a low lizard, resting your forearms on those blocks. And again, you can roll to the outer edge of right foot, let the knee drop wide, bow your head. And this is a really nice one for left hip flexor. If you're not feeling enough, try curling left toes under, stepping the knee back, lowering the knee, and you just move that knee back without dragging the kneecap is the idea. Good. Now go ahead and start to come up onto your hands. We're going to switch over to the other side. So you can just kind of move your blocks over to the right. You're going to step your left foot forward, toes turning out. Right knee is kneeling. Right hand stays down. Left hand is going to push on the inner left knee. You're going to drop that knee out wide. You're going to roll to the outer foot, turning your chest to the left, making big space between your shoulder and your ear, lengthening through the top of the head. And then taking left hand to the back of the head, lifting up through the elbow tip, and hopefully feeling a really good opening to the left side body. Good. And now gently turning. We're going to rest forearms on our blocks. You can keep that left foot where it is. Keep the knee falling out. Keep the outer edge rooted, the inner edge uprooted. Curling right toes under, stepping the knee back if you need a little bit more happening on the front right thigh. And then try to just smooth out the neckline. So looking straight down. Just kind of suspending that right hip flexor above the floor. Applying those nice deep breaths. And using your breath to comb through tension. Think about your breath just kind of moving through the tissue in the body, little areas of stuckness. Let the breath kind of sweep through. Good. And now start to move on to your hands. You're going to help yourself out of the pose. And you can bring yourself to a wide standing forward bend. Just walking the blocks with you, lining up the toes. Make sure your toes, your big toes are on the same line. Your toes are pointing forward. And then look forward. And exhale. Blocks don't need to be there if you don't need them. You can crawl your hands into the space, kind of lining up your fingertips with your toe tips, squeezing the elbows in so that you can help your shoulders broaden and your chest broaden. Moving the crown of the head to the floor. Attempting to straighten the legs, keeping the inner arches of your feet lifting, keeping the outer ankle bones pulling in, keeping a spread across the toe bases, not crushing or bulldozing that pinky toe. Good. And now inhale, walking yourself forward. Lower your knees and take a moment in Vajrasana. Just sitting down on the heels. Okay, so for the next piece, we're going to use a chair. This is where we're going to get a little bit more into the hip flexor region, which is so important for our back bends. And it is helpful if the chair is against a wall. It's not 100% necessary. Just watch that your chair doesn't slide away from you. But if it's easy enough to just put the chair between you and the wall, then that'll be helpful. You definitely want to have padding on your chair seat. So put a blanket over it. And you may also want to have padding on the floor. So you can put another blanket there. We're going to start with the top of the right foot on the chair. So you can't really see me, but I'll try to turn and show you that from the side angle. Okay, so the top of the foot on the chair, you want to see that the right knee is in line with the hip point. You're not, you're going to have a vertical thigh bone, and then you're going to do your best to really pull your right toes into the chair. So we all have different heights. We all have different sizes of chairs. So you might need to adjust under your knee. You might need to adjust the seat of the chair somehow with props, of course. These chairs aren't adjustable. Most of them aren't. So you have to use your props to kind of, again, that Goldilocks thing of making it perfect for you. So I'm going to move back to the wall version just so I don't go sliding around. And we have the right toes propped, the left foot standing in front of us. And we're just going to take hold of the hips here. And with your thumbs, gently push in on the tailbone. Roll your shoulders back and adjust the skull so it's right above the spine. You're not throwing your head forward, which we know can kind of happen sometimes in our back bends. We can kind of cheat and push our heads forward and feel like we're in a back bend when we aren't really in as deep of a back bend as we feel like we are. So you're going to draw those right toes into the chair. You're trying to elongate the front thigh of that right thigh, and you're keeping the hip flexor as open as you can. So you might even run your hand there and see how much of a crease there is. And we're trying to basically iron out that crease. So you want to keep moving tailbone in, shoulders back. The pressure down on the right toes is helpful. And just a few more breaths. Good. So we have the psoas now. We can take that right hand to the back of the head. And I want you to just lift the elbow tip up, but also back. Beautiful. And now inhale. You're going to gently, slowly come forward. You can always have blocks in front of you if the floor feels like it's 10 miles away. Shifting forward enough, you can take the right foot down. We're going to be swapping out for the left foot. So you'd be stepping forward with your right foot, and you're propping the top of your left foot. And you're kneeling on your left knee, which is why that blanket might be helpful. So your knee isn't bone on hard floor. Hands to the hips. Tailbone moves in. Activate those left toes into your chair, the blanket on your chair. Maybe seeing what's happening in your hip crease, how much of a crease there is. Starting to iron that out. Breathing into all that sensation you're feeling in that vertical left thigh, muscles of the thigh. And then you're going to try to keep right elbow tucked in or kind of pulled in toward midline. We'll take left hand to the back of the head. And we're going to lift up through the elbow tip, but also gently kind of over to the right a little bit, just to give left hip flexor a big opportunity to elongate, to release tension. Try to gently narrow the passageway between your hip points using the abdominals. Wonderful. 3 more breaths. Be active with that elbow. Lift it up and back. Wonderful. And now gently you're going to help yourself bring your arm down, bring your weight forward enough you can bring your toes off of your chair. Go ahead and tuck the legs under you and just sit down for a moment in Vajrasana. Taking a breath or two. Good. And now we're going to set up for Ustrasana, the camel pose, but you're going to be facing this chair and keep the blanket where it is. So again, I'm going to kind of appear hidden. So I'm going to change my setup so that you guys can see me very well. But if you have a wall, it is best to use it. So it's going to keep the chair in place. So set up your two blocks, kind of right outside your shins, toward the feet. And then the job is really to maintain contact of your hips or whatever part of your front body is touching the chair edge, because again, we're all different proportions. Your feet are in line with your knees for camel pose. So we want to keep that ironed out idea of the hip flexors. We want to keep elongating the psoas muscles on both sides so that we can really find more openness in our back bends. And we want to simultaneously move in, think about the hip bones coming together. So you're going to take fingertips onto your blocks, but if you move the contacts away from the chair, bring it back right away and adjust your blocks if necessary. So keeping pressure of the front body into the chair. You're going to start to lengthen back. You might come down onto your hands, onto those blocks. Rolling the shoulders back. And if your butt is turning into a hard little nugget, think about your inner thighs rolling back, spreading kind of the inner buttocks apart, keeping the center lines of your thighs parallel. Remember that you shouldn't throw your head back. We want to keep the chin not super far from the chest, lengthen through the crown of the head. Don't let the wave break at the neck. So think about the wave breaking at the very top of your head, or even continuing on. Good. So inhale, lift yourself up and out of it. You can just kind of kneel in front of that chair. Take your elbows to the chair seat. Take your hands to prayer. Rest your forehead against your thumbs. And just take a few moments. We are going to repeat Ustrasana. We'll go a little deeper. So just taking a moment to notice, to check in with your breathing. And before we go back in, just taking your thumb and index, take the thumb to the sternum, the index to the chin. When you come into Ustrasana, you shouldn't be losing that distance. So we do tend to, for most of us, we tend to kind of throw the head back. Again, the head and the eyes can kind of deceive us or trick us into thinking we're going so deep in our back bend. So really let your back bend not be about dropping at the neck or letting that wave break at the neck, okay? So lengthen all the way up and through the crown of the head. You might be able to do that little check while you're in there, so see about it. We're going to curl the toes underneath, giving our heels a little bit of elevation so that we can have a better chance of reaching them. So this is another kneeling one. If you're uncomfortable on the knees, like I am, just put a blanket down. This isn't about knees grinding on the floor, so that's not, you're not going to win any awards for enduring that knee pain. The toes are tucked under. You're going to keep the pressure of the hip points against your chair. We're going to iron out those hip flexors. And we're going to start with our hands clasping here. Kind of squeezing gently, laterally, those lower abdominals. Opening the hands nice and wide apart as you interlock the fingers. Extend the arms completely. Lift your breastbone, move your tailbone in. And remember the chin distance from the sternum. Don't try to lose that. And at the last moment, you can split the hands apart and reach for the heels maybe. And if you lost the contact of your front body to the chair, bring it back. You can correct it. You can bring it back. Let your temples descend. And again, watch the butt. If it's a little nugget, think about moving the flesh of the inner thighs back. Keep gently closing the passageway between the hip points and allowing psoas to elongate. Good, last 3 breaths. Nice, healthy external shoulder rotation should be happening here. Okay, inhale, lead with your chest. Come back up and go ahead and sit down. Elbows on the chair seat, hands to prayer, forehead against your thumbs, shoulders back, chest forward. And just a few breaths. We're going to set up for Viparita Dandasana. So we know Dandasana, I'll just remind you quickly, seated Dandasana, which refers to the Danda is the spine. Viparita is reverse, the Sanskrit word for reverse. And Dandasana, of course, is the staff pose, the spine pose. So in Viparita Dandasana, we're going to use our backless chair. And we're going to try to create head support for the top of the head. So if you don't own a bolster, then you're going to have to create something as bulky or high as a bolster that's also somewhat soft. You can get by with a block, but it's going to be stiff, so it's not the most comfortable. If you have a bolster, you can run some of it underneath your chair because you don't need that excess. And then you might also want to make a little bit additional height for the head. You don't know exactly what you need, so I usually overbuild my setup because it's easier to throw things aside than it is to try to gather them and put them under me. So you can overbuild your setup if you're not sure. I like to pad the chair because metal or wood is not usually the most comfortable, especially when you're wearing thin yoga pants. So you're going to climb into your chair. And you're going to start with knees bent, scooting your butt towards the back of the chair, which feels like the front because you're facing the opposite direction that you normally would. And then you're going to help yourself gently come back. We're attempting to have the front edge of the chair seat hitting us kind of right behind the breastbone so that we keep that breastbone really forward. The top of my head is going to get the height of my setup. And right now I'm noticing I have more than I need. My head is kind of jamming into it. So I'm going to remove this additional blanket. I don't need it. Start with your hands kind of wide outside the chair. And then as your shoulders begin to soften and externally rotate, you can start to thread the arms inside and grab onto the chair legs. From there, you might start to work with rotating the palms to face out, which will encourage deeper external shoulder rotation. Don't force these things. It's just good to know where we can go when we're feeling ready for more. Okay, so if the bolster is too much for you, because I noticed that mine might be too much if I stayed here very long, you could always just stack a couple thin blankets. So just always know that there's ways to perfect your setup, and you do really want to be precise with your setup. Okay, so once you have your arms kind of really in a nice opening position, then you can start to extend your legs. And for some of us, you might need a little height under the heels. So for some of us, extending the legs, we still get a knee bend because of the proportion of our chair and our body's not really lining up very well. So what we want is a straight leg. So for some of us, that might mean a block under the heels, or it might mean that you set up and you just place your feet on the wall, which is another great option. Okay, so you're going to straighten your legs. If your back says no, then you're going to keep working with the bent knee. And because this is a back bend, we want to space the feet generously so that the lower back doesn't shorten laterally, so that the pelvis doesn't shorten the abdominals. So just give your feet a little bit of a nice wide stance, like a little bit of a hair beyond hip distance. Your toes are in line with your heels. And you should feel really nice and open here. And if you have good contact of your heels on the floor or on the blocks, press them down, which will help you move the tailbone toward the ceiling, which will help you elongate the lumbar spine. Lastly, employ those transverse abdominals. Think about the hip points narrowing, coming closer together. And then as a result, remember what it felt like when the psoas got to take a little break because we recruited other muscles in the body. We'll see if you can kind of tap into a few breaths, finding more suppleness in the psoas muscle. Some yoga teachers refer to the psoas as the muscle of the soul because it's so interconnected with how we feel on an emotional level. Psoas does a lot of contracting for us. Contracting is our fear response. And sometimes that contraction in the body is so dominant that we start to kind of have this feedback loop of contraction. So fear when we don't really need fear, contraction when we don't really need contraction. So right now you're just kind of finding your expansiveness again. This is one of the poses that BKS Iyengar did every single day, Viparita Dandasana. So we'll stay another minute. Another half a minute. So we want to come out in a very conscious, gentle way. So start by just returning your feet underneath your knees, and then start to move your arms back to kind of the outside table, chair leg position. And then from there, you'll crawl your hands up to the back bar of the chair, and you'll use your upper arms against the chair seat, keeping your sternum forward, using the elbows and the upper arms against the chair seat to bring you upright. And once you're upright, you can just kind of scoot back so you have a lot of chair underneath you. And you'll just gently start to turn from side to side. In a very slow way, you can just kind of self-guide your rhythm here. Back bends are very invigorating and stimulating to the nervous system. And twists are very soothing. They're kind of the antidote if we tend to upregulate a little too much. Twists can be very down-regulating and equalize the body. So it's always nice to follow a back bending practice with a few twists. Just do a few more on your own time here. And we're not going to go anywhere if we're still dizzy. So just taking a moment to pause. The best way out of the chair when you've crawled into it this way is to simultaneously stand up and push your chair forward and then crawl out. I find is the least dangerous, I should say also known as safest way to do that. And then you can put your chair aside and move your any props that are on your mat, you can move them off. And we'll come into a Warrior One, which is a back bend. It's also a great, we're going to do a little variation that's great for the Psoas opening. Just make sure I can have a head here. So you can start facing the broad side of the mat, and we'll jump out. On a exhalation, you can jump the feet wide without gaining a lot of vertical height. And then you're going to take your hands in your hips in your hands, and pivot so that your right toes are 90, your left toes are 60 to 80, and then you're going to swivel your hips until they feel really nice and square. And then do your best to straighten your legs, especially the back leg. We don't want that quasi-bending thing happening. So really straighten the back leg, move the tailbone in. Your torso should be upright and not pitched forward like this. Okay, and then you're going to just take a moment to raise the arms. Look up slightly on an exhale, take the right knee above the ankle. Good, really lifting the inner corners of your shoulder blades toward the front body. You're going to bring your right hand back to your hip, left hand to the back of the head, and then you're going to take that left elbow up and back, opening that left psoas. Imagine that you're ripping your mat in half, scrubbing your feet in opposite directions, and you're employing the transverse abdominals. Good. Inhale, straighten the leg. You're going to widen your stance again, extend the arms, and jump or step back in. And just stand in mountain pose for a couple of breaths. Drop the shoulders, lift through the top of the head. Find your firm, spacious feet. And when you're ready, opening the eyes and jump or step out. Take your hands to your hips. We'll pivot the left toes out, right toes in. Finding your firm, straight legs. Tailbone moving in. Adjust the hips so they're on the same plane. Raise the arms, extend the arms completely. Lift your chest, lift your gaze. Exhale, taking the left knee above the ankle. Really anchoring into the right heel. Narrowing the hip points. Pushing the feet in opposite directions. We'll take the left hand back to the left hip, taking that right hand to the back of the head, and then taking the elbow tip up and back. You should feel an elongation happening to the right side body. Good. Keep working the feet, working between the hip points, breathing, keeping the tailbone moving in. Good. On an inhale, you're gonna straighten the leg, extend the arms, turn back to nice wide position, and jump or step back in, finding Tadasana. Close your eyes. Good. Okay, so we're gonna do a few more standing poses. Find your two blocks, put them to the right side of the mat. Come back to center, come back to mountain, and jump or step wide. Okay, we're gonna turn to the right, but this time we're coming into triangle, so you're keeping your shoulders and hips facing the broad side of the mat. Right toes pointing out, left toes slightly in, but returning your torso to shift from right to left so that your hips and shoulders are all staying with the broad side. Extend the arms, big inhale, exhale, extending into triangle pose. Using the block. Good. From here, we're coming into Arda Chandrasana. We did this kneeling before. Hand comes to your hip, right knee bends, tracks with the toes. Step your block forward on an exhale, launching into Arda Chandrasana, fully extending both legs, keeping your hips stacked, shoulders stacked, eventually arms stacked. Now remember when we grabbed the foot and kicked back and found a little back bend here? We're going to try that now standing. This is Shavasana, bending that left knee with the left hand finding the foot. This is the hardest part. You might need to actually come out of the pose to grab the foot, kick back into your hand, and then see if you can get the chest to turn out. And remember how helpful it is to really pressurize the foot into the hand. It's going to support you finding the back bend here. Left psoas is getting a nice long stretch. Okay, now from here, see if you can come back to Arda Chandrasana and then back to Trikonasana. And then from Trikonasana, inhale, come up, turn the toes forward, jump or step back in. Taking a few moments just to drop into Tadasana. Now, for some reason, I remembered needing two blocks there, but I think it's only one, as we just saw. So you're going to transfer one block, eyes open. I think maybe the two is if you need help getting into Shavasana, sometimes you can put both hands down for a moment. Of course, you're grabbing the foot with the hand eventually. So if you want to try with two, you can, if you think you need it. And we'll try that to the second side. As you're ready, we're going to come into triangle, turning left toes out, right toes in. Big in-breath, exhale, extending nice and long. Taking the block underneath your shoulder. Stacking the arm. Good. Taking the hand back to the hip. Bending left knee. Stepping the block forward, stepping the back leg forward. Exhale, lifting up into Arda Chandrasana. Aligning the hip points, aligning the shoulder, stacking the arm eventually. And I'll try to slow this down. So to get that foot into your hand, you might need to actually turn toward the floor, Bring the knee in nice and close to your standing leg knee. Find your foot and then try to bring it back up and open. And remember, it's going to help you to really kick into your hand, ironing out that right hip flexor. Okay, so from Shavasana, try to go back in. You're going to see if you can find Arda Chandrasana by releasing hold of your foot, stacking the arm, extending the leg, and then find your way back to Trikonasana, triangle pose. Just for a beat. Inhale, come up, turn your toes forward, jump or step back in, and be in Tadasana. Close your eyes, drop your shoulders. Let your feet take root into the floor beneath you. Let those waves of breath pass through. All right. Nadarajasana. So we'll come into dancer pose next. So you might need a wall or a chair. There's no shame in that. So using support when you need it is really a wise thing to do. I'm going to show you freestanding, but and I'm going to show you sideways so you can kind of see the shape. But you're going to stand into your right foot, bend your left knee, and with your left hand find the top of that left foot. And just like you did with Shavasana and when we did the kneeling version, do put pressure of your foot into your hand. It's going to help you extend the leg. It's going to help you iron out that hip flexor. As some counterbalance, extend your right arm, but move your shoulder back so your chest stays forward. We don't want the arm here and the chest collapse. So move your shoulder back. You can use your fingertips as a focal point. And this is where you might be touching a wall or touching a chair. So that's what that hand can do if you need a little more support. Okay, so the knees are going to stay close together. The idea is not to do Shavasana where we were open wide. So you want to keep your knee tracking in line with your hip. You don't want it going wide. As you send your torso forward, the leg goes back. You're pressing the foot into your hand to help you really open the front body. This is a balancing pose. So you're kind of negotiating with your standing leg, finding stability there. And roll your small pinky toe down, roll your inner thigh up of your aerial leg, just to equalize, because we don't want to go into the splaying action that occurs a lot of times in back bend. So go ahead and bring yourself back up. And then you can set the foot down. Give your standing leg a good shake. It's probably going to be really tired. So shake it out. You might even step the heel down and lean over it like a runner stretch. If you feel a lot of kind of cramping there, sometimes that happens. We don't want to go into second side kind of already feeling defeated or tired. Okay, so second side, you're going to step into left foot. Soften right knee. With your right hand, find your right foot. Try to bring the knees back together. Fully extend your standing leg as best you can. Try to iron out that right hip flexor. Counterbalance with your free arm in front of you or to a chair or wall. And as you're ready, you're kicking back in to your hand with the top of the foot. You're bringing your torso forward, the knee comes back. Small toe rolls down, inner thigh lifts up. Try to see in your mind's eye that knee in line with your hip. And then on an in-breath, pull the knee back in. You're bringing yourself back upright. Step the right foot down and release that left leg. You can shake it. You can dig the heel in and sit forward and just kind of elongate the calf muscle. Do what you need to do here. Good. All right, so I wanted to bring us into Navasana boat pose because we do always lift our legs. That's what we do all day when we're in our waking life. We're walking, we're sitting. That's going to contract your psoas. So it's inevitable. So we're not going to just avoid the fact that we contract the psoas. We're going to try to practice psoas contraction with wise action. So that's where, again, we're going to think about the points between the hips, bringing those muscles like plywood or particle board, bring them together which will save your psoas. It'll keep it somewhat supple and soft so that we're not just gripping and kind of shocking those psoas muscles every time we do hip flexion. So beginning with your feet forward, your hands under your thighs, angle your torso back, and then think about the hip points kind of gently narrowing. If you were touching them, you're not going to feel. It's not a huge exaggerated movement. It's very subtle. And then you're going to just lift one leg at a time, just kind of tiptoe quietly, and see if you can just kind of remember what it felt like when you're touching your psoas and it's not jumping under the fingertips. You're using wise actions. You're keeping that muscle soft and somewhat pliable and extended rather than shortened and tough and contracted. Okay. So then rest the feet, pull the heels close, bring your chest and thigh close together, thighs plural. Lift your pelvic floor, roll your shoulders back, bring your gaze slightly up because your torso is angled. We don't want to look forward. That's going to round your neck. We don't like that. Chest forward. Feet come from the floor. Extend your legs. Shins level with the floor. Now see if you can release your arms. You can soften your elbows, pull those inner hip bones together. See if you can take a few breaths here with some sense of softness. Holding the thighs, bringing the feet down, wrapping your arms around your legs, bowing your head, a couple breaths. We're going to come into Porvo Tanasana, which is the inverse of plank, which is a back bend. And it's a really nice way to elongate after the shortening that does occur, the contraction that does occur with boat pose. So we'll start with our legs extended in Dandasana. We'll take our hands behind us, just kind of on the fingertips, and lift your chest. And then place the heels of your hands down. On an exhale, draw your toes to the floor, lift your hips, roll the inner thighs down, bring your tailbone up toward the ceiling. Go ahead and have a seat. Draw the legs in, wrap your arms around your legs, sit up nice and tall and bow over the legs. Couple breaths. We are going to do it again, so just taking a moment to pause. This next one, you're going to see if you can hold it for 10 breaths. Of course, come down early if you need to. But try to hang in there and really see if this is the grand finale for you, if you can bring in all the wise actions you remember so that we're not just hardening and gripping the abdominals, we're using intelligent actions. Okay? So go ahead and get yourself ready. On exhale, you're going to press up, 10 breaths. As you're ready, have a seat. Help your heels pull in. Wrap your arms around your legs, bow your head. And as you're ready, you're going to quietly set up for Shavasana headstand. If you're skipping that inversion today, come into wide standing forward fold with head support, even using a wall if you'd like to have a little additional support. Otherwise, you can come into your headstand as you're ready. We'll do a 3-minute hold today. And I'll tell you when we're starting. If you've already started, you can either come down early or do a longer hold. And go ahead and begin. So it's not as easy to do when you don't have a wall, but there is an assist you can use when you're working with a wall that encourages the tailbone to move in
as we like to encourage on back bends. So it's a nice tie-in for headstand on a back bending cycle week. So what you do with the wall is you kind of bring your feet onto the wall, and as you scrub the feet down toward the floor, you can help iron out the hip flexors. You can help move the tailbone in, and then keeping that, you can try to reascend your legs without losing it. Of course, I have this sign. I keep telling myself I'm going to move this sign because it gets in my way quite a bit. And I don't want a sign falling on me in headstand. So maybe by next week, you'll see no more sign. And you can do that as many times as you feel is necessary. So as you hold the pose, it's just gravity, gravity, gravity. So you might need to go back and find that action again that does make you feel lighter and lengthened up. Again, you take the feet onto the wall, you drag the feet down, which helps you open the front body, which helps you move the tailbone in, and then you try to reascend the legs, keeping that. When you do inversion practice, it gives you a lot of sympathy for toddlers that are learning to walk, because basically we're learning to reorient ourselves in space and in the opposite position that we're used to. And so it kind of gives you back to beginner's mind, and it gives you a little more compassion for people that don't yet know how to walk and how much it really does require to kind of get all those circuits running together and the neurons connecting to help you do that in a way that's more rote. And I'm going to take a peek at the time here. I didn't really place my timer very wisely, but we have about 20 more seconds. And now see if you can come down in a way that's just kind of controlling your descent. You're going to try to keep a lift in the spine as you fold the knees in. So if something comes down, something's really got to keep going up. So that's your spine. And then as you tuck the knees in, keep lifting the buttocks, keep lifting the shoulder blades, resist all that gravity, and then eventually you're coming down. And just stay down in child's pose for a few moments. And now if you do have wall space, you're going to set up shoulder stand so that you can use your wall to help you not only get up today, but to employ that same action we just talked about in headstand. Because it, again, will help you correct when you're starting to feel the effects of gravity kind of compressing you. You can restore that lightness by scrubbing the feet down the wall, bringing the tailbone in, helping get your hips in line with your shoulders more. So set up, we will go right into Shavasana after this. So if you can set up in a way that you're able to just come into Shavasana, that's ideal. So I like to put 3 or 4 blankets with the neat edges all to the shoulder side in the sandwich, the mat sandwich I call it. So I'll fold this mat over the blanket setup once I have it. And it's a good idea to be neat with your props. I always think about the Leaning Tower of Pisa and that just one little error in the math or whatever it was that caused that tower to lean. I think about that when I'm setting up for this pose particularly. So you're going to drag that whole thing to the wall. So you kind of halved your distance there. Leave a little bit of openness at the top so your shoulders aren't going to get stuck and aren't going to be able to wiggle it and negotiate to be in perfect position.
And then strapping the arms if that's something that you do. We all have preferences on that. So I won't say do or don't, but if you haven't tried it, I always do recommend you at least give it a shot. So the strap loop, not to be repetitive, because I know we're all kind of the same group right now, but we're going to take the loop above the elbows, and it should kind of show up that your hands are as wide as your shoulders. That's your perfect custom size loop. Okay, and then I leave that on my non-dominant side so that my dominant hand can kind of find it under me when I need it to. I'm going to set up with a block here that's going to help me lift my sacrum, although that's not as important when you're using the wall because the wall is a big friend to help you get up and down. So you don't, if that's something you usually use a block when you're freestanding on the floor, you might not need it here, but I'm going to use it just because. So once you're resting on the stack, first of all, make sure it's even to both sides. You're not all to the left or all to the right. Also make sure you have about a distance of 1 inch from your shoulder to the edge of the blanket so that when you go up, you're not going to go crashing over and lose that support we need for the shoulders. Okay, the feet are here on the wall. Lift your hips enough and then help yourself find that strap with your free arm. And try to take the strap right above both elbows, which helps you get the elbows narrower, which helps you get the shoulders more broad. Okay, so the wall is there to help you climb up. You're going to use your hands flexing at the wrists, walking your hands up to the dorsal spine one day, someday. So that's the area between your shoulder blades. Your chin and chest are well connected, and then taking your legs up one at a time. Okay, so you can see how naturally the butt falls towards the wall side, the feet fall toward the head side. So that's where the wall comes in handy, is you bring your feet onto the wall, you scrub them down, it pulls your hips back above the shoulder line. It might help you get your hands closer to the dorsal spine, and then keeping that, you're gonna try to raise the legs, keeping the hips where they are. And if you lose it, you can go back to the wall and find it again. So it's a really good teacher, and it's a really good friend in Sarvandasana and shoulder stand. Even if you're fine on your own in the middle of the room, it's a nice thing to do once in a while, just to bring a little more precision, a little more support to this pose. Just a couple more minutes here. You can either come out through Plow Pose. So if you're going to go into Plow Pose, you'll bring your feet above your head, at which point you can take your strap off of your arms and reach for your feet with your hands, which will help you lower the legs down. Or you can start to move your feet back to the wall and remove the strap there. And then walk your spine down slowly. If you're in Plow Pose, keeping your arms reaching towards your feet, start to lower your hips back to the floor. And then once everybody has hips down, you're going to shift enough off that blanket setup that your shoulders and head come straight down to the floor. And then you can pick bound ankle legs for your feet. You might cross your ankles. You might take a moment to rest here and then transition into fully reclining Shavasana pose. But if you're comfortable here and the body is quiet and passive, it's perfectly fine to take your Shavasana immediately after shoulder stand. It's a wonderful doorway into this pose of zero effort, pose of stillness, and a pose of complete surrender. I welcome you to stay as long as you like. And namaste.